Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Brighton Music Club, our offshoot of the Brighton Film Club, which you can find on Instagram and online as well. This is Underrated Albums, and we are on episode 8 of our 10 episode series 1, where we are talking about albums that are underrated, those who have been overlooked, albums that are worth revisiting, albums that get critically damned or beaten down in public forums or album rankings or anything along those lines. Stuff that we really like and hold dear, not necessarily being better than an artist's perceived best or classic album, but something that we want to shed some light on and talk about, because quite often the albums in this series, as hopefully you would have heard, don't get spoken about that often anymore, and we just want to shed some light, praise those, and just give a bit of attention to them. And hopefully, if you give you guys something to listen to, or explore, or rediscover in these very strange times, we are fortunate to some of us are fortunate to have time to listen to more music. So this is just a bit of inspiration for that, linking in with our Brighton Film Club Instagram, which we are doing a series of isolation inspiration movies which are feel good and will put a smile on your face, and these albums absolutely the same. We are talking pure listening experiences. We understand the history and importance of certain records, and we're not going to dispute that. We just want to pick out some albums that are amazing to listen to, and that we really enjoy. Episode 8, as we have alluded to before, and is a continuation from the last episode, we are talking the Arctic Monkeys, and we are talking Humbug from 2009. Again, a really classic example of an underrated album, something that a lot of people will immediately turn their noses at or go, oh, of course you're going to talk about that. And it follows on from what we were talking about with The Strokes and with Angles, a band that is so important, very iconic, and has such an important opening statement that did so well. In The Strokes' case, influencing an entire generation. The Arctic Monkeys' case, that debut album was the best-selling British debut album of all time when it came out, and obviously has put them on this ascendant path to where they are now. And then Humbug was the complete about turn musically, shift in style, shift in taste, and really split the fan base in two. I think that's exactly what they wanted to do, and some people will still write them off and still want to hear songs that sound like the debut, and they will not like this era. Once again, it baffles me how people would not enjoy this particular album as a listening experience. We are massive staunch defenders of it here, and we certainly want you to go away and revisit this particular record. So Humbug came out 2009. I don't need to give you the Arctic Monkeys backstory. They are obviously one of the first sort of quote MySpace bands where they released free music on there. Shot to popularity on the back of sort of real word of mouth, early internet buzz success. Right place and right time, singing songs about teenage life in Britain, going out, drinking on the streets and going to clubs and bars. The first album is absolutely iconic. Every single person watching this video will have heard that first record, and its follow-up as well, Favourite Worst Nightmare, which continued on that theme, gave it a little bit more depth. That's another record that we really staunchly defend here. But nevertheless continued in the same vein sound-wise. Then cut to 2009, and they released this record of moody, sludgy, very much desert American-inspired rock, a lot more downbeat, very much more sort of oblique and metaphorical lyrically as well, not so realistic. And a lot of people just completely turned off and stopped listening. And again, we're not necessarily here to change people's minds completely. If you don't like an album, that's fair enough. But at least try and offer it some redemption and get people to go away and revisit it in a new light. I mean, quite simply, without Humbug, we don't get to AM in 2013, which, again, to a lot of people's ears and eyes is, and well, to the enemy, it was the album of the decade. It's certainly our album of the decade. That's not a poster or a feature that we've done yet. Spoiler alert as well. But it is something we'll get round to doing. And AM would sit atop of that pile. And you simply don't get to where they got with that particular record without having Humbug first. Story goes, as you will again probably know if you're a fan of this band, that they met or were big influence on them was Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, and they recorded Humbug with his supervision as a producer out in the desert in Rancho de la Luna in LA. They still had James Ford and the other sort of normal Arctic Monkeys alumni, but Homme was the kind of really big influence and informs this move into that sludgy, I hate the term stoner rock, which Queens of the Stone Age get attributed with, or desert rock. I don't subscribe to those terms, but that is what a lot of people know it as, and that's what this album tries to chime into a little bit. To be completely frank, it doesn't really sound like Queens of the Stone Age, which is to its credit. It doesn't completely copy down that path, and that keeps the Englishness intact, keeps the Arctic Monkeys nature intact. They could have just written a load of songs that sounded too American, and that would have been wrong. Don't get us wrong, we're huge Queens of the Stone Age fans here, as you can probably see, but it's definitely the right move to keep the Arctic Monkeys the way that they went. But that influence is definitely felt with the slightly heavier tone, the slightly darker sort of subject matter, the sort of background eeriness and the background sort of keyboard plinks and plonks, and the sort of guitar lines which are just sort of deeper, more involved, a bit for sort of heavy emphasis on the bass. And it's straight out of the traps. You can hear that with Mike Propeller. Having said that, I still think, certainly initially, this album at the beginning still keeps to that Arctic Monkey sound. It almost sounds like a kind of desert version of what those first two records would have sounded like. If you gave Josh the keys to those first albums and let him kind of write his own way around it, he may well have come up with that sort of Mike Propeller, Crime Lightning sort of sound, Dangerous Animals, where it kind of starts off. Then we kind of get to the middle section, where a lot of people switch off, but I think really is this album's uniqueness and really where they hone their style ahead of doing AM, where they kind of settled into songs which were a bit more low-key, back to that sort of ballad style, and that sort of middle section of Secret Door, Potion Approaching, and particularly Fire in the Fud, gave them an idea that you didn't need to write big choruses, they didn't need to be sort of pop sounding, they could go down that particular path and be more interesting sonically, which I think led to them getting to AM, where they kind of had the same feel, the same texture, but with a slightly bigger and that slightly hip-hop production, R&B production if you will, and that slightly more pop leaning, and I think that comes from those songs. Then Cornerstone, which is where a lot of people will only take this particular record, they'll only listen to that song, and actually incidentally live, generally it's only Cornerstone and occasionally Crying Lightning and Pretty Visitors, which they'll steal from this record. Don't need to say any more about Cornerstone. It's a wonderful piece of work and probably is the most similar to the first two albums. Wonderful lyric on top of that as well. And then the final three tunes, which I think to our ear are probably the best. You've got Dance Little Liar, which served as the tour opener on this particular album tour. Pretty Visitors, which we mentioned, is still something that they play now, which has that much more heavier edge, much faster, much more of a live sounding song, which I think really gave them some impetus to push on into that sort of aggressive arena that they did with AM. And the Jeweller's Hands, which is a bit longer, a bit more diversion. They went through some different routes, and you can hear that a lot on the B-sides of this era, and actually from the Favourite Worst Nightmare sort of B-sides as well. And again, it's probably led them into doing a slightly longer closing songs, which they had with Certain Romance and with 505, but then they followed up with Suck It and See, and with AM as well, and of course all the way up to now with Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino, that much more 70s spacey obviously completely different stylistically, that sound, and I think that may even stem all the way back down to the Jeweler's Hands, which has a little bit of that keyboard sound, a little bit of that slightly unusual storytelling way about it. It's an interesting thing. We talked about it in the Strokes, where is an album underrated? Do we hold it more dear because other people hit it with that critical stick? Do we hold it more dear because we need to push it on to people? I don't know. I can't speculate as to the psychology of that. Certainly it spoke to me, it spoke to us when this album came out. It really was everything I wanted it to be when I heard that. Arctic Monkeys, who were my favourite band at the time, that first album came out at the exact point in time for me personally, getting into music and discovering something on my own. It was the first time I had not listened to what everyone else was listening to and bought the record off my own back. Queens of the Stone Age were the other band that were very, very important to me at that time. And again, the most important thing that they got me into the music style that I'm into now. And knowing that these guys were going to team up was really, really important to me. And that won't be the same with other people. And I get that completely. And I can understand why people would prefer the debut or the second record, because it is slightly more easy listening and slightly more pop friendly. But I think with this one, and I don't like using the term sort of it's a grower, it needs more than one listen, all that sort of stuff, because I know people don't have the time and they want to listen to something straight away, and there are certain people who just don't get that aspect of listening to music. But I think rather than saying it's a grower, what I will say is rather than having it on as a sort of background listen, have it on some good headphones or speakers when you're going for a walk or on your commute or something along those lines, and really try and tune into it rather than tune out of it, rather than sort of reading alongside or distracting yourself or having it on low. Have it on loud and listen to the intricacies of the music here. Listen to a particularly Dance Little Liar, Jeweler's Hands, as I mentioned, and Fire and the Flood, as I mentioned, and listen to the sort of background, listen to how they're honing their craft, the drumming from Matt Helders, which has always been another underrated aspect, one of the best modern drummers, the bass lines, the way the guitars interlink, and the way that Alex Turner was trying to switch his lyrical style to be a little bit more metaphorical, but still has that relatability aspect to it. And also, most importantly, again, moving forward, the way he changed his sound to try and adopt that slightly more crooner aspect, to try and be a bit more of actual sort of singing, rather than that sort of fast speaking tone. Obviously, Pretty Visitors exempt. And again, it's so important. This album simply is that stepping stone to what came afterwards, and it needs to be seen as that, recognised as that, held up as that really important step. But also, again, as a listening experience, it hits all the right buttons. If you like AM, which almost everyone did, which I'm really delighted about, Humbug does give clues, and I think in hindsight it's easy to see that. Again, I'll staunchly defend it to the hills forever and a day. I wouldn't, don't get me wrong, it wouldn't be the number one Arctic Monkeys album if I was to do a particular list, which again is something that we might do as huge fans. But knowing them as I do and as we do, sort of inside out, every single song, every single lyric, I absolutely love this particular record. I think it's really so much depth to it, so interesting lyrically, really speaks to me and to us. It just does need reappraisal. It's really strong. It really flows very nicely. Again, it sort of starts high, goes down, and so sort of comes back again at the end. And go and have a re-listen to it. And also as well, if you are a fan, or you want to be a fan, or you like certain aspects but don't really know what else to listen to with Arctic Monkeys generally, I'd certainly recommend going and having a listen to their B-sides. The wonderful thing about streaming services is that it's all readily available, whether you use Tidal, which I'm posting the links on down below, or whether it's Spotify, or obviously you can use YouTube as well, or Apple Music, or whatever it might be. Other streaming services are available. Definitely go and have a listen to some of their B-sides. Really easy. Just scroll down to the single section, listen to the second songs, They're really consistent the whole way through their catalogue. Arguably, some of the B-sides are stronger than some album tracks. You could certainly make a B-sides album which would stand up very high in their ranking. And a lot of them tune into this sound that they had here, certainly in the early days. So have a listen to those, and you can feel the growth, you can feel it stylistically, you can see the journey that they went on, and that may give you a new reappraisal of Humbug. Certainly don't write it off. Don't jump on the bandwagon and say, yeah, I don't like it because it's hard to get into or X, Y, or Z. Don't buy that at all. Listen to it with your own ears, and let us know your thoughts. We're here to debate. We love it. It's something that we definitely want to talk about. It's one of our personal favourites. And yeah, there we go. That's our opinion on Humbug. And I would like to know the psychological aspect as well. Why we hold albums particularly dearly. Whether the fact that we need to defend them is a reason for liking something more or defending it more. I don't know. Really interesting. Give me your thoughts on that as well. Thanks as always for listening. I really appreciate people listening to the content. It's all about the music. We're just here to point people in different directions and talk about our passion. Hopefully you enjoy what we're putting out. Let us know if there's any improvements or anything that you'd like us to talk about moving forward. As I said, we want to do 10 episodes of this underrated album, Series 1. Certainly we'll do more and do a Series 2 and Series 3 and all that sort of stuff. But I've got some other ideas for different content. Might do a Q&A. Might talk about other records. So if anyone wants to know anything about me personally or us generally at the Brighton Music Club or the Brighton Film Club, please let me know on Instagram, online, or in the comments. And I would definitely want some different content. So we'll do that. And thanks very much again. Coming back at you tomorrow with episode number 9 of this series. Go and listen to Humbug by the Arctic Monkeys. Goodbye.